When I was a kid, my friends and I used to make these fake news broadcasts with a camcorder. That was something that you used before the cameras on your phone. We'd speed up songs from my parents' record collection for the intro music. And one of the songs that we used was by a group called Shalimar, which was they're from the 70s, R&B and soul. And their song was called Take That to the Bank. We thought we were just goofing around and making fun of the anchors and the whole production. It was great fun. But looking back, what I realized is that we were seeing through the performance. That even though we were kids, we understood that the news wasn't actually reality, that it was just a format. It was people in costume using a certain tone of voice. Now, fast forward 30 years, I just finished 10 years in the Quincy City Council. And here's what I learned. It's that instinct that we had when we were kids, that sense that something about all this doesn't quite add up. You still have that. You're not crazy. You're actually paying attention. Welcome to Take That to the Bank. I'm Cain. Now, if you're listening to this or watching this, you already know that something's off. You don't need me to convince you of that because you've felt it. Maybe you're exhausted trying to keep up with everything that you're supposed to care about. Maybe you watch the news and you think, this doesn't actually match what I see in my actual life. Maybe you've noticed that the more you pay attention, the less anything makes sense. Now, I don't think that's a bug. I actually think that that's a feature. And the fact that you noticed, it means you're already ahead of most people. And this show is for people like you. People who trust their own instincts enough to question the narrative. People who want to think clearly instead of just picking a team and being right all the time, which from what I've watched looks extremely tiring. Now, some episodes will be me sharing what I learned from a decade in government. Others, I'll have guests, and there'll be people who figured out how to see clearly and they've built something real with that knowledge. Today, it's just me, and I want to validate something that you've probably already sensed. It's that there's a machine running. And I don't mean that in a conspiratorial way. I mean that there's a machine with incentives. And you've probably already noticed how it works. Maybe you just didn't have the language for it yet. So let me give you an example of what I mean. We're going to do a short exercise together. So you know that feeling that you get when you see or you hear certain words or names and something happens in your body before you even think about it? That's real. You're not imagining it. So I'm going to read you a list, and I bet you already know what's going to happen. So I just want you to pay attention to yourself for a second. You don't have to do anything with it. I just want you to notice. Presidential election. Trump. Biden. Abortion. Guns. COVID. Vaccines. DEI. BLM. Immigration. Migrant crisis. Ukraine. Israel. Gaza. Climate change. China. You felt it, right? Maybe it was your pulse that ticked up. Maybe you felt a surge of, I know exactly what's wrong here. Maybe your mind went straight to your argument or how frustrated you are that other people just don't get it. Here's what I want you to know. You're not wrong for feeling that way. The reaction is real. It's just not as random as you might think. Those words are super loaded with emotional charge. And you've been smart enough to notice that certain topics make you feel a certain way. What you might not have realized is how intentional that is. I've watched this from the inside for 10 years. It's the things that get the most attention and the most coverage, the most outrage. They're not the most important things happening. They're just the things that produce the most reaction. And here's the key. You already knew this, and that's why you're listening. You already sensed that your attention was being directed towards some things and away from others. With tech, algorithms reward emotion because emotion keeps you scrolling. Media sells emotion because emotion keeps you watching. And politicians use emotion because emotion gets you contributions and votes. So the actual work of governing, the boring, important stuff, you don't see it. And it's not because it's not happening, but it's because it doesn't make you feel anything. And the thing is, you're smart enough to have noticed this pattern. That instinct that you have that something's not right, trust it. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. I want to tell you about how I got here, because I know that you'll be able to relate to parts of this. Now, for most of my life, I wanted to be president of the United States. That was my childhood ambition. At the age of 7, my mom put a George H.W. Bush bumper sticker on my jacket as I was sent out to school. And probably from then, I had a whole plan. The right schools, the right path, the whole thing. Very easy. But somewhere along the way, I started asking questions. And it's not because I thought I was smarter than anyone else, but it was because things just didn't add up. So I studied. I worked in commercial real estate. I worked in global infrastructure development. I worked in tech. I got an MBA. I traveled the world. I saw how power and money actually move, and not just how we're told that those things move. I came back to Quincy. I served on the city council for 10 years, and I stayed in the game. I watched from the inside, but I kept building. I helped launch a municipal fiber optic network in Quincy. I co-founded QUBIC Labs, which is a nonprofit accelerator that supports founders that are building technology businesses, mostly around blockchain and digital infrastructure. And here's what I learned from living in both worlds, business and government, local and global. It's that if something feels incomplete to you, it probably is. So the mainstream narrative is incomplete. The alternative explanations are also incomplete. Both have pieces of truth. And if you feel like you're stuck between two stories and neither one quite fits, you're not confused, you're seeing clearly. Now, most people pick a side and they defend it because it makes them feel like they're on solid ground. People feel out of control. But you're willing to sit with the discomfort of not being sure, and that takes courage. And it's the only way to actually see what's real. This show is for people like you. For people who trust their instincts enough, even when it's uncomfortable. People who've seen enough to know that the official story isn't the whole story, but they haven't given up on building something real. So here's what I want you to know. The world isn't what you were told it was, but you've already suspected that. And that uneasy feeling you've had, you're right. It's the institutions, it's the narratives, the rules that everyone supposedly follows. A lot of that is just performance. And the fact that you could sense that means your bullshit detector is working just fine. So when most people, when they start to see this, they get angry. They feel betrayed. And that's valid. But here's the opportunity. Once you see that performance, stop wasting energy fighting phantoms and take your power back. I was recently on a podcast and I was talking about some controversy that was dominating the news. And the question came up, when do I actually need to care? What's the point where something truly matters that I need to care? And I realized that you probably already have good instincts about this. You can tell the difference between something that actually affects your life and something that's just noise. You just haven't given yourself permission to trust that instinct. Most of what you're told to care about, it doesn't affect you. It's not your fight. And you're not selfish or ignorant for focusing on what's actually in front of you. I think you're being smart. You have limited time, you have limited energy. So I have a tool for you that might help. It's something that you're doing probably already intuitively, but I think having language for it helps. And it's a framework that I call notice versus react. So, we went through that exercise And the next time you feel that surge, that emotional reaction, and you will, just pause for 1 second. You don't have to change how you feel, but ask yourself a couple of questions. 1, what am I being sold right now? 2, what or who profits if I stay focused on this? And 3, what am I not seeing while I'm looking at this? You're already asking versions of these questions, and that's why you're here. This just gives you a framework to work with along the way. There's an investor, his name is Chamath P. I can't pronounce his last name. He's on the All In podcast. And he said something a few years ago that got him in trouble. Someone brought up some issue and he said, that's below my line. And people got mad, but he was just saying out loud what you've probably already been thinking, which is, I can't care about everything. And trying to is going to destroy me. You don't have a duty to be outraged about everything. You have a responsibility to see clearly and to act where you actually have influence. And you're already better at distinguishing that than you give yourself credit for. So I have a little homework for you this week. And this is probably something you've wanted to do anyway if you already haven't. And that's picking out a story that makes you react. Maybe any of those subject matter that we went through or something else that's more current. Find different resources. Find 3 different resources. And just watch how the story changes depending on who's telling it. I promise you'll see it right away. And you'll realize already that you knew this was happening. You just hadn't watched it in action. So every episode of this show, whether it's just me or whether it's a guest, we're going to leave you with 3 things, okay? We're going to leave you with something to read, something to watch, and something to listen to. So today, something to read, the book that I'm recommending is Self-Reliance and Other Essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I've been reading this book in particular, for 20 years. It never reads the same twice. And every time I pick it up, it gives me exactly the insight that I need for that moment in time. So if you're working on trusting your own judgment, I suggest you start here. The something to watch, I'm going to recommend Pluribus on Apple TV. And this is what happens when there actually is a hive mind and there are only a few people left on Earth to see it through. You should watch it and think about what we just talked about. And a song for today. I'm building a Spotify playlist with all the songs so you can follow along. You'll see it. And this week, I want you to listen to our theme song. When this podcast or show takes off and we can license the song, we'll have it as our intro and outro song. But Take That to the Bank by Shalimar. Give that a listen. Listen to the whole album if you want. And remember what it felt like to see through the performance without second guessing yourself. All links for this are going to be in the show notes. On the next episode, I'm going to share a specific story from my time in government. Something that perfectly shows how the gap between reality and reporting actually works. And I think you'll recognize it pretty quickly. So if this resonates with you, I hope you'll share it with one person. Someone else who you know already sees this stuff. Someone you chat with. Someone else who's been quietly noticing and wondering if they're the only one. I know I've felt like the only one for a while. But you're not. We're going to build something here. We're going to build a community of people who trust with their own eyes. This is Take That to the Bank. I'm Ian Cain.